The Imperial German Navy's submarine program began in the early 20th century, a period of rapid advancement in submarine technology worldwide. Initially, Germany lagged behind the pioneers in this field, namely the United States and Britain, influenced by the designs of American inventor John Philip Holland, who in 1900 created the first modern submarine, the USS Holland, as well as British adaptations of these boats. Germany decided to develop its own vessels for coastal defense. The Royal Navy had licensed Holland's design almost immediately, commissioning its own Holland-class boats within a couple of years, so that by the time German industry seriously entered the field, both the United States and Britain already had operational submarine flotillas gaining practical sea experience. Germany's own experimentation with underwater craft actually stretched back further to 1850 when the Bavarian engineer Wilhelm Bauer built the small hand-cranked submarine Brandtauscher in Kiel. That early attempt sank on its very first test dive, and for decades afterward, German naval planners showed little interest in continuing the experiment. It was only after Holland's American designs and their British derivatives proved themselves in service that German industry, led by the Krupp concern, moved to close the gap with the other naval powers. Early experiments included the electric submarine Forelle, launched in 1903. It was built at the Krupp shipyard based on blueprints by Spanish designer Raimondo de Quevelet-Montjustin, who was inspired by the French submarine Gymnote. The next step was the Carp submarine of 1905, which was the first to use gasoline engines for surface running and battery recharging. These prototypes convinced the Navy to order the U-1 in 1906 as a test model. This marked the beginning of the systematic development of German U-boats with kerosene-electric systems, which replaced gasoline engines to reduce the risk of fires. Notably, the Forelle was built by Krupp as a private commercial venture rather than on direct naval orders, since the German Admiralty initially regarded de Quevelet's proposal as too experimental to pursue. At just over 40 feet long and displacing under 20 tons, the little craft relied purely on batteries for propulsion, with no onboard means of recharging them at sea, which sharply limited her range. Unable to interest the German Navy, Krupp instead sold Forelle to Imperial Russia in 1904 for use in the Russo-Japanese War, shipping her by rail to Vladivostok. The follow-on Carp design fared better commercially. Russia ordered 3 examples fitted with a gasoline engine for surface running and battery recharging, and it was this improved arrangement that finally persuaded the German Navy to order a single evaluation boat of its own, commissioned in 1906 as U-1. In the years that followed, a rivalry emerged between Germania Werft, which held practical shipbuilding experience from the export orders, and the Navy's own torpedo inspection design office, which oversaw acceptance of new boats. This friction eased once de Quevelet left Germania Werft, allowing the two sides to cooperate more closely on subsequent designs. Progress was not without setbacks, however. The loss of U-3 in a diving accident in November 1911 was a sobering reminder of how much remained unproven in submarine operations, even as the U-5 class entered service. Drawing on the operational experience of U-boats, U-1 through U-4, which were limited to port protection, had a surface speed of 10 to 11 knots and a range of about 1,500 nautical miles, the Navy ordered a new class. On April 8, 1908, the U-5 class was ordered to expand coastal operations. 4 U-boats, U-5, U-6, U-7, and U-8, were built at the shipyard in Kiel. This reflected the Navy's desire to create more capable vessels for extended patrols, utilizing more reliable kerosene-electric engines. In the new design, surface speed increased to nearly 13.5 knots, and the cruising range extended to 3,300 nautical miles at a surface speed of 9 knots. This enabled larger-scale reconnaissance missions in the North Sea. The main innovation was the adoption of a double hull design which significantly improved stability, buoyancy control, and seaworthiness compared to their single-hull predecessors. Among other important innovations of the U-5 class were two propellers on two shafts. This enhanced maneuverability and reliability compared to the single-shaft systems of their predecessors. The hull length was increased to 188 feet, allowing for higher capacity batteries. The power plant now consisted of 4 kerosene engines with a combined output of 888 horsepower for surface running. These were safer and more efficient than gasoline engines. For submerged operations, they utilized 2 electric motors, producing 1,026 horsepower. Thanks to this, submerged range increased to 55 nautical miles at a submerged speed of 5 knots. All these changes, successfully tested in 1911, made this class a transitional link to the larger wartime U-boats. The primary focus remained on practical coastal defense, without radical departures from time-tested designs. The submarine SMU-5 was laid down on August 24, 1908, at the shipyard in Kiel, Germany. On January 8, 1910, the boat was launched, and on July 2nd, it was officially commissioned into the Imperial German Navy. The boat was built specifically at the Friedrich Krupp Germania Werft yard under yard number 147 at a total cost of roughly $2.5 million gold mark. She was one of a small, closely related batch of 4 vessels, U-5 through U-8, ordered together and built side by side at the same yard, sharing a common design and construction timetable. As the lead boat, U-5 effectively served as the pattern ship against which her 3 sisters were measured during trials. In surface trim, the displacement of the U-boat was 557 tons, and when submerged, 701 tons. The total hull length reached 188 feet with a beam of 18 feet in a draft of 11 feet. Surface propulsion came from 4 two-stroke Quarting kerosene engines, delivering a combined 900 horsepower to twin propellers. When submerged, the boat relied on 2 Siemens-Schuckert electric motors that produced 1,040 horsepower. This setup gave the vessel a top surface speed of 13.4 knots and a maximum submerged speed of 10.2 knots. Her operating range was 3,300 nautical miles at a cruising surface speed of 9 knots, or 55 nautical miles at a submerged speed of 5 knots. The initial armament featured 4 nearly 18-inch torpedo tubes. 2 were mounted in the bow, with the other 2 at the stern. The U-boat carried a total of 6 Type C-06 torpedoes. By 1915, a 1.5-inch Hotchkiss revolving cannon was installed on the deck aft of the conning tower for surface defense. The crew consisted of 28 men, including 4 officers. The maximum diving depth recorded for the class was about 30 meters, a modest figure by the standards of later wartime submarines, but consistent with a design still meant chiefly for coastal patrol rather than deep evasive diving. This same conservative approach shaped much of the class's engineering. Rather than chasing radical new technology, the builders at Germania Werft refined and enlarged proven components, prioritizing reliability over experimentation in a period when submarine mechanical failures, like those that turned back U-5 and U-9 during the Scapa Flow raid, were still common. The vessel featured a double hull design. An inner pressure hull was surrounded by an outer hull which housed large ballast tanks to improve buoyancy and stability. The boat also featured a flat deck and an enlarged conning tower. Her standard diving depth was 98 feet, while the crush depth was rated at 164 feet. The official commissioning ceremony for SMU-5 took place on July 2, 1910, after which the submarine joined the torpedo division of the High Seas Fleet. This marked the beginning for the lead boat of the U-5 class. designed to bolster coastal defense with greater range and speed than earlier models. In the end, none of the 4 U-5 class boats survived the war. Beyond U-5's own loss off Zeebrugge, her sister U-7 was destroyed by a fellow German submarine in a friendly fire accident, while U-6 and U-8 were likewise lost in the course of wartime operations. Their shared fate reflected just how hazardous the earliest years of submarine warfare were for crews on both sides, regardless of a boat's design or the caution of her commander. Immediately afterward, sea trials began in the Baltic Sea. Command tested engine performance, diving procedures, and submerged endurance. By late 1910, intensive crew training was underway. The men drilled on navigation, torpedo firing, and emergency diving. These drills prepared the crew for coordinated tactical operations alongside the rest of the fleet. During fleet maneuvers in 1911 and 1912, early submarines, including the U-5 class, proved their immense tactical value in coastal reconnaissance. They simulated ambushes and scouting missions, proving they could silently disrupt enemy battle formations. Their success in these exercises confirmed the strategic advantage the U-5 class brought to the high seas fleet well before the outbreak of war. Following her commissioning in 1910, U-5 joined the 1st Torpedo Flotilla stationed in Kiel. Between 1911 and 1914, the U-boat conducted training missions with the submarine forces of the Imperial German Navy. The vessel served as a testing platform for developing new tactics. This helped the submarine service transition from an experimental branch to a fully combat-ready force by the spring of 1914. By that time, the Navy operated 2 flotillas boasting a total of 27 U-boats. U-5 participated in major peacetime exercises. For instance, during the Kiel Week Regatta in 1912, these early submarines were showcased as the cutting edge of naval power. Kiel Week had long been one of the principal venues where the Imperial Navy displayed its growing strength to both domestic audiences and visiting foreign delegations, and the presence of operational U-boats alongside battleships and cruisers signaled how far submarine development had come since the tentative days of the Forelle and Carp less than a decade earlier. In 1913, German U-boats took part in North Sea maneuvers, practicing attacks against surface ships. During those drills, a single submarine successfully simulated the sinking of 3 battleships. This clearly demonstrated just how much the tactical value of submarines had grown in modern naval operations. U-5 played a key role in training crews for the entire fleet. In the Baltic and North Seas, sailors practiced torpedo attacks, evasive maneuvers, and submerged navigation. Thanks to better range and speed compared to previous classes, this U-boat was used to simulate long patrols and joint operations with surface vessels. By 1913, technological improvements, particularly in observation systems, became an important step in preparing for a potential war. These years of routine drilling were not glamorous, but they proved essential. The Imperial Navy's submarine arm had grown from a handful of experimental prototypes in the early 1900s to a genuine operational branch within little more than a decade, and boats like U-5, tasked largely with training rather than combat trials, were the workhorses that made that growth possible. By spring 1914, the 2 active flotillas fielded a combined 27 boats of varying types and vintages, a force still modest compared to Britain's submarine fleet, but one that had accumulated real experience in diving, torpedo handling, and coordinated fleet operations, experience that would be tested within months once the war began in earnest. As World War I kicked off on August 1st, 1914, the U-boat 5 was mobilized. The Imperial German Navy quickly shifted to combat operations. This submarine was transferred to the 1st Flotilla for service in the North Sea. On that same day, Captain Lieutenant Johannes Limmer took command. This made the U-boat 5 part of the High Seas Fleet's submarine force. Their operations were coordinated by Corvette Captain Herman Bauer to back the overall naval strategy. The boat was deployed to a fortified forward base on Helgoland Island. From there, it was tasked with defensive patrols in the Helgoland Bight, aimed at stopping any potential breakthrough by British ships into the North Sea. On August 6th, a large-scale offensive was launched. The U-boat 5, along with U-boats from U-7 through U-9 and U-13 through U-18, set out to strike the British Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow. However, due to engine problems, the boat was forced to turn back. Preparations involved checking the weapons and the crew's readiness. The submarine was integrated into the flotilla's overall defense system alongside surface vessels. This sortie was the very first war patrol ever undertaken by a fleet of submarines, and its results were mixed at best for the young U-boat arm. U-5 was not alone in turning back with mechanical trouble. U-9 suffered a similar engine breakdown and likewise returned to Helgoland without reaching the patrol line. U-13 vanished during the operation and was never found, presumed lost by accident or mine, while U-15 was spotted on the surface by the British light cruiser HMS Birmingham after an unsuccessful torpedo attack on the battleship HMS Monarch and was rammed and sunk with all hands. By the time the surviving boats limped back to base around August 12th, the flotilla had lost roughly a fifth of its total strength without sinking a single enemy vessel. The operation was coordinated by Corvette Captain Herman Bauer in his role as Führer Unterseebude, the officer responsible for directing Germany's entire submarine force, and despite its costly outcome, the raid unsettled the Royal Navy enough that the Grand Fleet's main anchorage at Scapa Flow was judged inadequately defended and reinforced in the months that followed. After Great Britain declared war on August 4, 1914, the U-boat 5 was placed on high alert. It stood watch in a defensive U-boat barrier, protecting German coastal waters and tracking enemy movements. These early operations marked the transition from peacetime exercises to actual combat. The U-boat 5 helped maintain the fleet's high readiness during the tense first weeks of the conflict. The U-boat U-5 conducted 2 patrols at the start of World War I as part of the Imperial German Navy. It served in the first flotilla from August to December 1914 under the command of Captain Lieutenant Johannes Lemmer. These patrols took place in the North Sea region and included operations out of bases in Flanders, such as Zeebrugge and Ostend. At that time, submarine warfare tactics were just starting to take shape, and many aspects remained uncertain. The Flanders bases from which U-5 operated late in 1914 would soon grow into one of the most important U-boat centers of the entire war. German forces occupying the Belgian coast established a sheltered submarine base further inland at Bruges, safely out of range of British naval guns, connecting to the sea through canals that emptied into the harbors at Ostend and Zeebrugge. Waters just off this stretch of coast, sometimes described by later divers and historians as the England-France-Belgium Triangle, were thick with British minefields intended to bottle up exactly this kind of activity, making the approaches to Zeebrugge and Ostend some of the most dangerous waters a U-boat crew could operate in throughout the war. During this period, the U-boat 5 saw no combat and scored no victories. This was due to the cautious approach of commanders like Lemmer. Facing Allied patrols and early technical limitations, they prioritized the survival of the boat over risky attacks. Other similar submarines engaged in risky operations and often suffered losses. For example, the U-7 was accidentally torpedoed by the German U-boat U-22 off the coast of the Netherlands on January 21, 1915. 24 sailors died in that incident, with only 1 survivor. In contrast, the U-Boat 5's patrols went smoothly, allowing the boat to serve right up until its final mission. While returning from its second combat patrol in the North Sea, the U-Boat 5 went missing off the coast of Zeebrugge, Belgium. Its last recorded coordinates in this area were around December 18, 1914. The boat had set out on this patrol on December 13th, operating in the southern North Sea, but again had no combat engagements. The exact circumstances of its sinking remain unknown, though historical documents suggest an accident rather than enemy action. Before the wreck was discovered in 2023, it was believed the boat might have hit a mine. However, no signs of mine damage or combat involvement have been confirmed. All 29 crew members were lost, including the commander, Johannes Lemmer. There were no survivors, and the German Naval Command never received a distress signal. Search operations in the area were called off on December 20th, 1914, after which the U-Boat 5 was officially declared lost at sea. On September 4th, 2023, marine archaeologist Thomas Termote discovered the wreck of the U-Boat 5 in Belgian waters near Zeebrugge. The wreck lay just north of the harbor where the U-boat went down many years ago. The discovery was announced by Karl de Caluwe, the governor of West Flanders, during a press conference in Ostend. It was the oldest German U-boat lost in Belgian waters during World War I. The wreck of U-5 was located alongside that of another German submarine, UC-14, a mine-laying boat built in 1915 and lost in October 1917 after departing Zeebrugge on what proved to be her final mission. Both wrecks had long appeared as unidentified marks on nautical charts, and it took Termote's team years of survey work to confirm their identities. Unlike U-5, the UC-14 wreck showed clear signs of having struck a mine. Termote, who has spent decades searching for German submarine wrecks off the Belgian coast, and by the mid-2020s had identified nearly all of the 11 known to lie in Belgian waters, described the identification of each boat as important both for historical understanding and for the families of the lost crews. German authorities were subsequently consulted about descendants of the U-5 crew, continuing a pattern of cooperation that, in a similar case involving another Flanders-based U-boat wreck identified years later, de Caluwe described as valuable a century on. The hull remains intact on the seafloor in remarkably good condition. Non-intrusive surveys confirmed the boat was lost to an accident, not combat damage. Because it's a war grave containing the remains of all 29 sailors, the site is protected under Belgian law. Authorities have proposed additional security measures to prevent any damage and commissioned a scientific report for further study. Details like the propellers and torpedo tubes are clearly visible at the site. This makes the location incredibly valuable for naval archaeology, even without raising the U-boat. The story of U-5 highlights the vulnerability of early German U-boats. The vessel had completed 2 patrols without sinking a single enemy ship, a sharp contrast to the success of later, more modern models. Its loss in an accident illustrates the immense risks involved in the early days of submarine warfare. German authorities were notified of the discovery to help track down the relatives of the lost crew and begin joint historical research. The identification of U-5's wreck was part of a much longer effort by Belgian maritime archaeologists to account for every German submarine lost off their coast during the war. Of the 11 such wrecks known to lie in Belgian waters, U-5 and UC-14 were among the last to be positively identified, and it would take until 2025 for the final one, the mine-laying boat UB-57, to be confirmed after divers worked with a dredging company to expose her propellers, buried under several meters of sand near the coast. Each successful identification has added another chapter to the story of the Flanders U-boat war, and each has been treated as with U-5, as the discovery of a sailor's grave rather than simply a historical curiosity, with Belgian authorities consistently choosing protective measures over recovery or disturbance of the wrecks.